You know, as a journalist, you see this happen over and over again, and it's very strange that institutions seldom get this message. If I can venture closer to the realm of opinion, that essentially, not to put too fine a point on it, but the cover-up is almost always worse than the crime. In this case, one of the issues with what ultimately I think amounts to a cover-up, although it's not clear even to this date how much of that was by design and how much of it was by default. But the dissuading of asking the question of where the epidemic began, of looking for a point source, even as my articles and the Al Jazeera video that you saw and others were coming out, I think really, I think they made the situation worse. So in addition to the releasing of this toxin from the Rio cholera into the Haitian ecosystem, it also, who knows what possibilities there might have been for helping contain its spread earlier or preventing reintroductions, or we have no idea what happened. Beyond that, from an institutional standpoint, it really made them look much worse than they otherwise might have had to. People would have still been furious, rightly so, but it may have been interpreted as something of a massive industrial accident because I don't think that anybody so far to mind, well, people say this, but I don't think that any of the major groups who are prosecuting this lawsuit or have been driving for more investigations, and certainly for my part as a journalist, have found evidence or alleged that this was intentional, that there was a board meeting in New York or Kathmandu, and it was decided that the best thing to do in Haiti in October of 2010 was to introduce a virulent strain of cholera. It happened. There appear to be a lot of reasons why it happened. In the manual for the medical manual for peacekeeping operations, you are not required to test for cholera, first of all. Second of all, the examinations are carried out by the individual nation's own doctors, so they would have been Nepalese military doctors performing the examinations. On the form, if they had seen what they would have considered worrisome diarrhea, it's amazing how many words you don't normally use while you're having a discussion about this, but that's what people have is diarrhea. That they could have then run a test, but there was nothing compelling them to. If they decided that it wasn't out of the ordinary, and at that moment, all over several regions of Nepal, there was a cholera epidemic going on, so it might not have been out of the ordinary. They didn't have to examine it, and then one of the most amazing pieces of the independent panel report that the UN commissioned was a piece of discussion that after the medical examinations were done, the soldiers were then free to go home for about 10 days to the Nepalese countryside to be with their families before they were deployed on mission, which essentially means that effectively there was no medical examination, because there was no medical examination between the time that they were in their home villages or cities and the time that they were deployed to Haiti. That seems to be an avoidable mistake. That seems to be something that can be changed. Now, generals always rightly complain about fighting the last war. I think you need to look broader than just cholera. You need to examine this whole process, because just trying to prevent a cholera epidemic from being carried from one country to another is not going to prevent whatever the next screw-up could be. But that's an example of negligence. But if, and this is my initial point, where I'm basically just going to leave it, if from the very beginning there hadn't been dissembling press releases put out in French saying this is absolutely impossible because the sanitation at Netbat 1 in May, the city of Haiti, is so clean, and we're so careful that there's no way this could have ever happened. And then once the evidence started mounting, well, look, you guys are really wasting time. This is not an important question. And then really trying to shut down inquiry by accusing people who were pursuing this, people including Dr. Paul Farmer as an example. Even though I don't think they named him by name when they were saying this, but by implication, since they were saying this about everybody. That you're going to stoke anger, you're going to, essentially you're going to have blood on your hands because you're going to make riots happen. But ultimately, what we saw, and again, these are matters of interpretation, and people have different takes, but at the time, it seemed clear that part of what was stoking the anger in those riots, like the ones in Cap-Haïtien, was the dissembling, was the feeling that the United Nations and the international community in general was not taking Haitian lives as seriously as they would take their own, or take lives in their own countries. And the last thought is that it's interesting, the quote from the guy at the barricade in Cap-Haïtien. It's interesting if you listen. He's clearly extremely angry, and he's using very apocalyptic language, or they're all going to die, we're all going to die. But in the middle, he had this brief statement where he said that they have to leave our country, and if they have a vaccine, they have to give it to us. And what he's doing in that moment is, even though he's very angry and has probably been in the sun all day and been going through everything that you go through in the middle of a riot, there's still a moment of lucidity there, because what he's saying is, look, there are ways to handle this. Like, if they have a vaccine, the specific thing that he brought up, I don't think would have been the realistic point, but I think what he's saying is, if there's a way for this to be dealt with, if there's a way for this to be taken seriously, if there's a way for this to be investigated, if there's a way for this to be controlled, if there's a way for justice, that's a way out. And for some reason, and it baffles me as a journalist who's been covering this, the authorities have not wanted to take that way out. And each time they don't take it, it gets harder. But each time they don't take it from now on, it will continue getting harder. And eventually, if we haven't already passed that point, it's going to be too late for them to make the situation right.